Welcome to The Authority File, the podcast where you'll hear conversations with academic librarians, technologists, researchers, and authors whose work is laying the foundation for higher education's future. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. If you're new to The Authority File, you can listen to and find previous episodes on all of the major podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, and on our website, choice360.org. One of the more exciting aspects of academic librarianship is the constant stream of innovation that's happening in campus libraries across the country. From big solutions to small, librarians are especially adept at finding new ways to serve their communities, make their own jobs more efficient, or advance the profession into new realms. In this four-part series, which is provided with support from Sage Publishing, I'm excited to speak with three librarians who have each developed their own projects. We'll devote an episode to each of them, and Martha Sedgwick, Vice President of Innovation at Sage, will be on hand to provide further perspective on the innovation happening across the market. In the fourth episode, we'll all come together and hear specific takeaways from each of our guests that they learned while working on their projects. Along with Martha, my guests include Jamia Williams, Health Sciences Librarian at SUNY Brockport and co-host of the LibVoices podcast. Lauren Puzier, User Experience Librarian at University at Albany, who helped develop the Library System Status Discovery Tool, an online dashboard that alerts users to the status of the library's digital resources, and Darryl Stuhr, Director of Digitization and Digital Preservation Services at Baylor University, who was instrumental in building the Black Gospel Music Preservation Project from the ground up. In this first episode, we're joined by Jamia, who will talk about her LibVoices podcast and how she got it started. Okay, Jamia, Lauren, Darryl, and Martha. We've got a big group for this series. Welcome to the program. Jamia, we'll start with you. Let's talk about your LibVoices podcast. Maybe you can give us a little bit of a primer on it, what its editorial scope is, who your audience is, and maybe a typical guest.
So our tagline is Hear from Librarians of Color, speak to the fullness of their careers, including successes, challenges, and achievements. How do they do it? Join us to find out on their LibVoices. So our audience is for anyone that want to hear from Black, Indigenous, people of color that work in the information profession. Our guests have been some people from a variety of backgrounds and places. So we've had people that have worked in the archives, people that are in the public library, academic library, and various spaces. So some of the people that have came on our show has been Dr. Sophia Noble, Dr. Nicole Cook, Katrina Davis Kendrick, Derek Jefferson, and so many more. I could go on. So that's our scope, and that's who our audience is for anyone that's interested in what we do.
Excellent. So how long have you been doing this so far?
So we launched in March 2020 during the height of the pandemic.
Yeah.
Our initial date was supposed to be February 2020, but life happened and so did the pandemic. So it happened in March 2020, which we felt was even better because it's Women's History Month and the creators and hosts are Black women. So we felt it was perfect.
There you go. Good. Talk a little bit about what the inspiration for the podcast is and was, kind of the opportunity you identified for it.
Yeah, so for me, librarianship is not my first profession, it's my second. So before I came into the profession, I wanted to get information about how is it for people of color or Black people in the profession. And I was searching hard and I did come across like one YouTube video at the time. And then I love podcasts and I felt like this was a way to get those stories out there. How are our experiences within the profession? How did we get here? What have we achieved? What things, have we grown from? So I felt like that was a perfect opportunity to fill that need for those that want to get into the profession or those that are in the profession and want to understand how did certain people do certain things.
Right. So do you, describe it as sort of the conversations you have is, the topics more aspirational or prescriptive, or like, does it, get into sort of the nuts and bolts of the profession itself from the perspective of the BIPOC community, or all of the above?
Yeah, I would say all of the above.
Yeah.
Some of our guests have really given some, tips and tricks on how to publish, for instance,
Hmm.
or, how to get tenure or talk about that. And then some are just inspirational.
Yeah.
People talk about like combating health issues and how being stressed and not taking care of themselves,
Right.
you know, went into them having health problems.
Hmm.
So talking about that and, telling our listeners, take care of yourself, also telling our listeners on, ways to collaborate. So I think it's all the above.
Yeah, good. So as you kind of ramped up for the February, which turned into March launch, what went into that planning process? And, do you have partners in the project? And, how did you sort of outline what you wanted to do?
Yeah, so I went to ACRL 2019,
Hmm.
and one of the people that I was in conversation with and, had the opportunity to get to know better was Amanda M. Leftwich. And I had a vulnerable moment with her and I told her about this podcast idea. And
Hmm.
it just so happened that she was in conversation with Jamila Gabriel, who wanted to do a podcast as well. And so Amanda said, I'll run it past Jamila, see what she thinks of you coming on board. And thankfully, Jamila was okay with that. And so we started the planning process in 2019 because we knew this was something new to all of us. It was just a passion of ours, and this was not our area of expertise. So we needed that time to learn, time to plan, and to really map out how we're going to get people on the show to interview them.
Hmm. So do you have sort of a editorial calendar, so to speak, where you kind of plan out your guests in advance and then send out invites and sort of line them up that way? Or do you kind of do it, one at a time kind of thing?
Yeah, so we have 10 episodes in a season and they
Hmm.
are released monthly. So our guests usually come on at least 6 months before we actually release an episode.
Mm,
So
nice.
so we get it all done early because we do have full-time jobs.
Right.
And we do have lives outside of librarianship on top of that,
Yeah.
and all that stuff. So we need that time.
Mm,
If it was our full-time job, sure, we can have a weekly podcast, but that's not realistic, and we wanted something realistic and something to keep people, wanting to tune in every month. So we felt a month was possible. So yeah, so the editorial process happens on my end, and also my husband helps me with that.
hmm.
He has a background in music production, so thankfully, with anything that's a little wonky or weird in the sound, he's able to tweak as much as he can because
Yeah.
sometimes we just can't. Like our one episode that we had to redo it all over with the guests because it was just terrible. But we learned from that situation,
Sure. Yeah.
to make sure everyone has good headsets or a good microphone. So, yeah,
Yeah, it's good. That's a lot of people underestimate the work that goes into
yeah,
producing a podcast, and
yes,
a monthly schedule is perfect.
yeah,
Especially as you say, you've already got a full time job and
hmm
a life outside of that as well, and that's a good way segue into my next question. And LibVoices obviously is an independent project, not specifically affiliated with your institution, and so I'm wondering what you might consider to be the advantages and/or hurdles of having that independent aspect to the podcast.
So the advantage is I don't have to get institutional approval.
Hmm. Yeah.
I can talk about whatever I want. We can bring on whoever we want.
Hmm.
And, I'm not representing my institution because that can get a little tricky.
Right.
You're representing your institution. You can't say certain things. You know, I'm representing Jamia. These are my views. These are not the views of, my employer, which
Hmm.
I know is not the case because that's not always going to happen. And then also, the tricky part is, making that time outside of work.
Right.
Like if I there's now that we're going back to in-person conferencing,
Hmm.
that's more time that I have to, schedule in there. And then also making sure that we're realistic with our timelines. So that can be a little tricky too,
Yeah.
especially if, the beginning of us, because I work in an academic library, the beginning of the semester is really busy for myself with instruction and, programming and things like that.
Hmm.
So that's why we do most of our recording during the summertime if we can with our guests, because the beginning of the semester is busy. So.
Exactly. Right. Right. I'm wondering if you could describe a little bit about how the podcast has evolved since you started. I mean, you've mentioned at least one good learning experience, but I'm wondering, what are some of the incremental improvements you've made along the way? And
Yeah, so we decided to use a social media manager system. So we
Mhm.
were using Latagram, and now I use Hootsuite. And one of our ways we create promotional materials is using Canva. And now they even have like a social media manager type of aspect to the platform, which is great. So
Mhm.
just being flexible with what social media manager we use, also working through what hashtags work, what gives us that visibility that we're looking for.
Yeah.
And also the editing portion, I have learned a lot. I knew nothing about editing. I leaned heavily on, like I said, my husband as a music producer,
Yeah.
and now I'm doing it mostly by myself. I would say 98% at this point by myself.
Excellent.
Once in a while, I need a little help, but most of it is by myself. So I went from knowing nothing to now I feel like I'm more, I wouldn't say I'm, an expert at editing, but
Yeah.
I know what I'm doing now, and that has grown leaps and bounds. And then even with my interaction with social media has grown too. You
Mhm.
know, I know, how to interact with folks, and our followers have grown, and that's a great thing.
Mhm. Fantastic. How do you, especially as sort of an independent project, how are you measuring success? I mean, are you looking closely at engagement metrics to the extent that you can? I know it's really hard to measure or get analytics on from podcast platforms on performance and stuff, but what makes a successful program for you?
Yeah, so we do, keep track of our numbers, like how many people are, how many target, what's our targeted audience numbers
Right.
and all that stuff. We do
Hmm.
keep a number of that. But what to me is, I feel like is the most impactful is the stories
Mm.
that, people, either by retweeting what we said and pulling out a
Yeah.
quote from someone that was a guest, or even like I've known, like even some of our guests have used it when they present. They have used it when they have published certain things, their
Hmm.
experience on the podcast. So, and then people saying, I thought I was alone in this and I wasn't.
Yeah.
Hearing those stories is like, wow.
Hmm.
That's how for me, that's how I measure the impact that we're having and the success we're having, because it really, is resonating with folks and their experiences.
Right. I'm wondering, we do come across quite, a lot of librarians who are interested in podcasting. It seems to be kind of a uniquely appropriate thing for the library profession to be doing. Can you do you have any advice you can share for other academic librarians who might be wanting to start up a podcast themselves?
Yeah, so one thing is, do your research, which, see what's out there to help you have a successful podcast. Now that I feel like it's one of a big trend is podcasting I feel like has made a surge. Like
Yeah.
a lot of people that I admire as far as like artists and comedians and they all have podcasts now. It's like, wow. So, look out there to those resources to help you with what kind of equipment you need, what time you might need. I know that we did a little piece for someone's book that's coming out about, podcasting in libraries, and someone recently cited us in their article about podcasts in libraries. So there's resources out there, and there's people that are giving tips and tricks on how to have a successful podcast. So just put all that together and glean from it, and then also, reach out. For the most part, librarians are helpful and want to provide information. So, reaching out to see like, hey, how did you start? Any advice you want to give me?
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure for the most part they're willing to help.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, the kind of bootstrapping aspect of starting a podcast is sort of a blessing and a curse. I mean, it's fairly easy to get it going, but then you're doing it, and then you're all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, what, this is a lot, or but it is fun to do. Martha, I wanted to bring you in real quick, and I mean, from your perspective at Sage, just what you think. I mean, how are podcasts a uniquely effective initiative for academic libraries to pursue?
Yeah. I think there's a sociologist at Cambridge, Mark Carrigan, who says that who said that listening is an enormously valuable for scholarship in terms of expanding how we talk about, share, and engage with ideas. And I think that's true not just for researchers, but for academic librarians as well. We consume and engage with ideas now through a whole range of media, and there's lots of important ideas shared through podcast feeds and in our academic publishing library space. They become a great jumping off point, I think, for new conversations, to spark creativity and to solve problems. And at Sage, we've been investing in podcasting in the academic space for some time. About a decade ago, we launched a podcast series called Social Science Bites that aims to connect important social science discoveries with the wider world. And it's been fun getting involved in that and seeing how the listenership has grown for that series over time. But for podcasting more generally, I think podcasts offer a sort of a great medium to engage with ideas when you're on the go, if you're driving or catching the tube, and they work really well, particularly for sort of timely engagement, connecting listeners with newsworthy pieces and giving new voices. So
excellent.
I think it's fantastic medium and so exciting seeing how LibVoices has grown over the past couple of years.
Yeah, exactly. Jamia, would you agree with that? I mean, in terms of like the sort of academic librarian space picking up on the podcast trend?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. But when we're doing the background work in 2019, the number of academic podcasts have definitely grown, and we've noticed for sure. Yeah.
I think it's a great way for library voices to really get out there and really build the strength of the librarian community, that library voice and impact.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the profession is so dynamic and changing all the time that the more people can relate their sort of professional experiences to their colleagues, the better, I would say. You just heard from Jamia Williams, Health Sciences Librarian at SUNY Brockport and co-host of the LibVoices podcast. This 4-part series is brought to you with support from Sage Publishing. Join us next week when we continue our series on innovation in academic libraries with our next guest, Lauren Puzier, User Experience Librarian at University at Albany and one of the co-developers of the Library System Status Discovery Tool, an online dashboard that alerts users in real time to the status of the library's digital resources.
One of the things I remember seeing when I first started at the library was this really scary red alert banner on the top of the website.
Yeah.
Now, we've all seen these since COVID hit because a lot of companies have been using them, for important health and safety information. But before COVID, we were using these scary things for like ebooks down for 20 minutes or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed too much for what the message was. I think one time I remember seeing like a really obscure music database was like noted on this banner, and that wouldn't be something affecting all of our patrons. So it just wasn't the most appropriate way to let people know something was down for maintenance or whatnot.
As always, sponsorship and advertising for the Authority File podcast are handled by Choice's advertising manager, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced and edited by Choice's digital media producer, Sabrina Kofer. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.